what does prevention look like, the role and importance of multidisciplinary teams. And I'm Mindy Shreve, a member of the steering committee. Just a reminder, the QR codes are on these posters to the right and left if you have any questions, or you can really just say them out loud to the moderator. Otherwise, Sarah will get them through the iPad.
I will.
And also welcome to those people who are online as well as in here. I'll turn it over to Sarah Budge, who is the moderator for this esteemed panel.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. My name is Sarah Weiniger-Budge. I'm the Program Director of Exit USA at Life After Hate. And that is all I will say probably for the rest of the time. I'm just going to let our panelists talk. My selfish reason for convening this panel and for wanting us to talk about this is we talk about the necessity of having multidisciplinary teams working with individuals who are involved in violent extremism to prevent violence and to reverse radicalization and engagement in violent extremism. So I selfishly would like this team of panelists to tell me what's the perfect team? What do we need in a multidisciplinary team? No pressure, everybody. And how do we address and navigate some of the barriers to engaging in a multidisciplinary environment? So I'm going to start with Cynthia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cynthia Miller-Idris. I run the Polarization and Extremism Research and Innovation Lab at American University, also known as Peril. We have 19 people now in the lab, and only 2 or 3 of them have overlapping disciplines. So we are deliberately multidisciplinary, and so I was really excited to see this panel. In terms of, so we design and test interventions to prevent. We think of ourselves as pre-preventative, really primary prevention. We try to prevent people from being persuaded by propaganda, disinformation, conspiracy theories, bad content online, and to equip communities with the tools. So we're not a de-radicalization in that, and on the other end, we're really a primary prevention of radicalization and prevention of being persuaded by things, basically. And so it's more media literacy, digital literacy type of work. And so we need a lot of folks, both we have clinical psychologists, that's really important, people who understand human behavior. I'm a cultural sociologist. We have a team who are media and communications scholars because we do a lot of video-based work. So people who know how to communicate and how to get videos down to really short communicable form. And we have a lot of folks in the education side of things, so curriculum, education, training. We have an anthropologist on the team. We have, so really just pretty much everything you can imagine, except we only have one person who's traditionally trained in terrorism and counterterrorism studies. So we have a lot of folks who come at it from other types of disciplines. And I think that that's, for us, that's a real asset. But I don't think there is a perfect multidisciplinary team. I think our goal is to have it be as multidisciplinary as possible, I'd say.
David O'Brien from Yorktown Family Services, and I'm the Director of Mental Health. I'm also the Director of a program we started in 2020 due to the uptick of seeing youth and young adults moving towards violent extremism in Canada, called ETA, Estimated Time of Arrival. So it's a mobile, rapid access, multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary team made up of a variety of professionals. It's a one-stop shop to address mental health, social health, what we call, I guess, psycho or biopsychosocial supports at the individual level. And since 2020, we've engaged with about 60 people under the age of 35 across ideological lines in the intervention space. When the question was proposed around what's the ultimate team, I feel really blessed that we have an outstanding model that I feel addresses a lot of the intersections of how people end up in the violent extremism space. Currently, right now, we have 2 licensed therapists, so they're master's level social workers who provide family therapy and mental health therapy for the individuals involved and their families. We also have non-licensed practitioners, people that have maybe sometimes lived experience or experience working in other similar disciplines such as gang intervention. So we have what we call engagement and intervention workers and outreach workers. So these folks really are the relationship building people. They build relationships with hard to reach folks who've faced numerous barriers to support. And just gonna kind of give a shout out to the panel before us. All of the clients we see have been suspended, expelled from inpatient units in hospitals, psychiatric care, We're the last resort, and we probably have the smallest budget compared to some of our national hospitals that say we can't handle this. Go to Yorktown. So our engagement workers really build those relationships, and we work from a step-care model where it's, let's just go for a coffee and have a conversation. A lot of our work can be on the streets. It's not necessarily office-based. So it's very hands-on, it's intensive. We use text messaging. We use online sort of engagement strategies. A lot of our engagement workers will actually play video games with our youth that are involved in hate-like video games to build that rapport connection. Once that begins to happen, the trust builds with the organization, and then we move into our what we call more intensive services. So that'd be sort of the psychotherapy and psychiatry. I think the big thing we're missing on our team that we would love to have is a researcher. So we're very frontline focused, but we don't have a lot of sort of expertise in terms of program evaluation, and also kind of researchers that have their I guess, understanding what is happening out there in terms of the trends. And we know that this field can be very dynamic in terms of what is to come and what is happening. So I think having a researcher on our team would be fantastic.
I'm Rob Mundy. I'm a case manager with Life After Hate. I'm a social worker, and it's important, I think, when we talk about social work in this field to consider specifically what a social worker can and can't do. There's sometimes misconceptions about what my role is or isn't that I think really impacts not just our team, but the health and safety of the people we care for. So my role as a social worker on our team is fundamentally case management and not therapy. And I make that distinction because I've been a therapist in the past. I've done clinical social work for actually more of my career than I was a case manager. But I've also played a role in various community health projects where that role gets very confused between case management and therapy. And it makes it extremely hard for our clients to succeed when they aren't sure what you're going to be supporting them doing. And to echo what Dave mentioned, our folks are often shunned, turned away from other useful services. And so if we are confusing to them up front, it makes it even harder for them to access useful services. One of the benefits of social workers in this role, I'll rep our social work friends in the audience and maybe in the live stream too, is we have a National Association of Social Work that has a code of ethics that, again, is national, and that provides sort of quality control for when you have a social worker on your team doing this work. They are bound by a set of standards no matter where they got trained. Wherever they got their training and where they got their degree, you can expect a similar quality. We also have a licensing body that oversees social work in each state. And that can be confusing in some ways because all the requirements aren't always the same from state to state. But that means that there's accountability for the social work that you are doing. And that means that your clients, and our clients certainly benefit from the training our social workers have, knowing that they have to regularly get CEUs, they have to regularly adhere to that code of ethics, and that you're getting the best practice that you can get. Again, for people that often come to us saying, I've tried this before with other people and it hasn't worked. One of the most common refrains we hear from our clients, and I should say I've worked both with people working to disengage from hate and with families supporting somebody who is I've tried this before and it didn't work. And resoundingly, something we keep coming back to in our work is, I can't imagine how you managed to find the courage to come back. And part of us honoring that courage that our clients come to us with is saying, we owe you better than what you've gotten. And so we like to think that social work plays that essential role in that larger space, especially when it comes to building rapport, finding ways to connect to people, and trying to get down to the simplest answer we can to what's going to get you to be your best self. And so if I could think of our dream team, this is going to, I think, recall a previous conversation we had in this space, and I bet will come up again this week. There probably isn't a perfect cookie-cutter team for everybody. I think the best teams and the best approaches we've had as a national organization working with people locally across the country is to find the people in your community that matter to you. So for some people, that may be a really influential faith leader who plays a role in your life. For others, it's a professor. For others, it's a really effective local counselor. And so getting to the point of engaging our clients and our families with what do you think is going to be most useful to you is really key to figure out who that dream team is.
Hi, I'm Chuck Leek, and I am the technical title is exit specialist, but what that really means is peer mentor with Life After Hate. I'm a former. I provide peer mentoring services to people who are exiting hate movements, meeting with them on a regular basis, and just developing rapport with them and trying to kind of help guide them through the process of first disengaging from whatever activity it is they are involved in, committing to nonviolence, and then, once those goals are established, then to disengaging and reintegrating with the greater society. I don't really have any, educational background in this. I kind of learned what I learned the hard way. Life After Hate has provided training, HIPAA training, and other items that, like the National Social Work Code of Ethics that Rob spoke of. We have a version of that we've tailored and use internally. It's essentially the same thing. And it's been a long day. I'm really tired, so bear with me. And as far as a dream team goes, David stole a little bit of my thunder there, but I think that for individuals that are disengaging from these movements, to be able to provide a spectrum of services to them rather than just peer mentoring, which is trying to pose as psychotherapy and therapy and social work all in one over-encompassing thing that really doesn't do any of those things because the people doing it don't know how. I think that organizations working in this space with these individuals should have a spectrum of professionals that have backgrounds in psychology, psychotherapy, not necessarily providing those services, but understanding them. Social workers, peer mentors who can both build a rapport with people who might not really be willing to build rapport with somebody who doesn't understand them in that way, and also who can inform the other practitioners that you're working alongside of things that they might be missing that you understand from having the background with this kind of activity and these kind of people. You can inform them of things that they may be missing. And the one thing that I don't really see a lot of, but I do think would be extremely helpful to groups working in this space doing this work would be researchers on the team, as David was saying, that can keep the team informed of what's current, what's historical, and things to watch out for. A whole spectrum of things that a researcher can provide to you that most of us don't really have the time to keep on tabs on our own.
Thanks. Good afternoon. Hi, everybody. My name is Matt Talbot. Thrilled to be here. Thank you for including me in this and being part of this panel. I am the principal consultant for an independent consulting company down in San Antonio, Texas. Additionally, I run the Workplace Violence Prevention Program for the Veterans Administration in San Antonio as well. I do work with our local fusion center, do consulting for our schools. I also happen to be the president of the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals South Central chapter, and was fortunate to help develop last year the first collegiate certificate program in behavioral threat assessment and risk management to help standardize the profession. So very excited about that to share. I'd agree. The most important thing before I go on is I'm a dad, and I know my daughter's watching from home with my wife, so I want to say hi to Nikki. Listen to mom. So I agree, definitely that I don't think that there is the best case, the best example of what makes the perfect team. I don't think it exists. I think what you need to consider when you're putting together a team, which has to be multidisciplinary because it's all about diverse perspectives. And diverse in the realm of teams isn't just about what's your discipline, what are the initials after your name. Foremost, I don't believe that credentials tell much about anything anybody is capable of and what they can do. So I think you need to look beyond the label a little bit. And what you really want to focus on, I think, where we've had success as I run to multidisciplinary threat assessment teams, is looking for what I consider to find your best zookeeper. What I mean by that is if you ever watch people who take care of animals and you watch zookeepers, they're brilliant in that they can identify a potential attack or a problem between animals well before it happens. There's no language, there's no communication, and they do it simply by becoming familiar with the behavior of other people. So I'm always looking for the best zookeeper to put on our team because they're going to see the behavior before it happens. We can narrow that down. Well, who is the zookeeper? What's the profession? And we've heard different ideas about who it could be. Would it be a mental health professional? Is it a researcher? Is it a law enforcement professional? And I think to get to the heart of it is sometimes think outside the box, think differently. Because when I started, I assumed that mental health professionals would be the most adept at this work. Some are, some are not. I've learned that some of our clinical pharmacists have been our most stellar, most holistically thinking individuals, and I would have thought they just wanted to push pills. So it was very surprising. So look in areas that you might not often think. I'd say look at 4 different things to consider when you're assembling a team or bringing a group of people together, even if it's not a formal team, but that group to help try to discern and solve a problem. 1, consider what the evidence and the research tells you is what's a best practice, who should be on a team, look at the standards that exist and use that as your general framework. I'd think about who else do I want on this team to help meet what the organizational needs are, what their expectations. You also want to look at what are the expectations and needs of the individual person that I'm sitting across from or who I might be concerned about. And I think the most important criteria that you want to think about is using common sense. And I don't think we use that often. Sometimes I think in our world as a mental health professional, we're told to stick with what does the evidence say. Use what you know. We don't want to just let bias come in and skew us in a really inappropriate or disproportionate direction. But in reality, when we dispel and get rid of our common sense or the authenticity of who we are, when we don't do things like use appropriate self-disclosure to remain human with that person, we're not going to build authentic relationships to build the connections which allow us to mitigate the crises which underlie the behavior we're trying to stop. So it's really this intersection of everything. So I could go on. This is very difficult to narrow this down in like 4 or 5 minutes. But I would just say find your zookeeper, go out there, look for those people, and don't have in your head a specific idea of who it should be because some template, some publication told me this is who I have to have on the team.
I don't want to go next.
You have to.
I don't have a choice. Hi, everyone. My name is Sammy Wicks. I am a senior program manager at the National Policing Institute, formerly the National Police Foundation. I currently work at the Center for Targeted Violence Prevention, which was formerly the Center for Mass Violence Response Study, which is all a big mouthful. So, and I am also a recovering police officer. I did that for 11 years before I switched out of law enforcement. I had a really great career. And I think that the tail end of that career is really the reason that I get to sit on the stage with all of these great people. The last couple of years that I was at my last agency, I was on our co-responder team. I was partnered with a mental health professional. She likes to remind everybody that on her first day of work, I didn't want her because she was the intern and we had a car crash. That was not intentional. But she was great. And one of the things that I noticed that engaging in that sort of small binary multidisciplinary team was that you really learn a lot, both professionally and personally, from someone who has a completely different set of skills, training, perspective, not even just professionally, but maybe even personally. And that may be sort of grounded in the experiences that they've had in their professional life as well, right? So that was really beneficial. And then the last few years that we were there, her and I really spearheaded a targeted violence prevention program that was still grounded in that co-responder model. So again, sort of doing those biopsychosocial evaluations, holistic evaluations, so risk assessment, needs assessment, behavioral threat assessment, all of those things, and then trying to come up with a intervention and a management plan that worked for that individual, right? Sort of considering what that individual needed to be on that healthy life path and be the person that they want to be, the better part of themselves. I think that one of the things that I think is really interesting to think about when you ask that question of sort of what's the dream team, what's the perfect multidisciplinary team, I think I want to talk about very briefly 3 sort of disciplines that are often left out. And one you all brought up already, but I think I want to talk about it in a different way. So I think it's incredibly beneficial to have those professional researchers, professional evaluators that can tell you if what you're doing is working or not, which is super important, right? Why do we want to keep, we all only get a limited amount of funds to be able to do the work that we do. Why pour that resource, the people power, the money, all of that things into stuff that doesn't work and doesn't give us the outcomes that we want? But I think the other important part about having those folks as well is that as someone who likes to think of myself as a part-time researcher, I think that we don't engage with professionals enough and let what questions they need answered by the research really drive what we go out and try to answer. So I think that that can be a complementary partnership that exists there. I think that the other thing that we really need to think about as well is medical professionals. So, this is not a brag, it just is what it is. It's kind of the state of where we were in Colorado, but my partner and I serviced 50 individuals in less than 2 years. And when I think about that population of individuals that we were working with, across the ideological spectrum as far as like where they were sitting, a lot of those folks had unmet medical needs as well. And they also some of them had ongoing medical issues that caused them to be engaged with medical professionals on a regular basis, and nobody had ever engaged them and sort of talked to them about what their behavior looked like in the community, right? So really sort of tapping into those pre-existing connections and services that they already have, and making sure that there's that relationship, one where we're not just asking them for information about what's going on with this client, so again we can get them on a proper pathway, what's going to be best for them as an individual, but I think also sharing information as well. I think that's such a hard part, and this is coming from a former law enforcement perspective. I heard somebody on the last panel talk about how difficult it can be for law enforcement to share information, and it is in certain instances, but really there's probably about 85 to 90% of information that we could share. We're just not comfortable sharing it because that's just not traditionally how the relationship with law enforcement is with other folks. So I think that's something that we can do a better job of. I can stop there.
Perfect.
So everyone here has experience working on a multidisciplinary team. And I'm wondering about some of the barriers that you face to that. How do you navigate those barriers? How do you mitigate those? And some of it was talked about in the last panel, and Sammy was talking about that. But, so anybody who wants to jump in. And please feel free to submit questions. Use the QR code there.
I can go. I think one of the biggest challenges, I think also one of the biggest benefits if we work it right, is I think there's this powerful moment when you are in your own silo doing this work as a social worker, and you're constantly working to help other people and you're not prioritizing yourself reliably. And you get to a multidisciplinary team and you learn, wow, that's not unique to my profession. Every other professional here also has the same problem. We run to every fire and we don't take care of ourselves, I think, sufficiently sometimes. And so one of the challenges in multidisciplinary work I've seen, I think a presenter from the previous panel talked about language and culture being so localized to a given type of work, a type of approach to this work, that people can get really defensive when you hit their sore spots about how they view this problem or how they imagine hope and healing for a community. And so working on a multidisciplinary team can be a really effective way to quickly realize your perspective isn't the only one when it comes to dealing with hate. I think you can go different directions in that. One way is to avoid that, to shut down, to continue to be anxious or angry. But I think one of the gifts I've gotten to be part of on Life After Hate, working alongside people like Chuck and Sarah, is you learn really quickly how effective it is to know that somebody else has hurt in a similar way that you have doing this work and can relate to you in a really powerful way. So one of those gifts, the challenges of a multidisciplinary team is that you're working with other people who are sometimes scared of this too, but don't have the permission to say it because they're the ones that you're supposed to go to get this done. But the gift there is you also have, because of your different professions and your different approaches to this work, even more strategies to get through the day and to take care of each other. And if you can, from the ground up, build a team that honors that vulnerability and allows people to come forward and inform your entire practice with it, that challenge to making an effective multidisciplinary team becomes one of our biggest strengths, because we can build into, from the ground up, a system that's going to take care of us alongside our clients.
I think for us, Yorktown, it's because we offer a multidisciplinary one-stop shop approach. There is times when we need services outside of our team because we can't provide absolutely everything or connections to everything. So there's been several examples where we need inpatient hospital services, and we'll send people, clients to the hospitals for that assessment, and we're sometimes afraid to actually disclose that this is a national security issue. But this is a good person, and perhaps they can turn their life around. But we need a deeper assessment in an inpatient setting, a closed setting. we often get, we don't know how to deal with this. But also, I think because we offer so much, there's this reliance on us to kind of take it all on, at least in Toronto. That, go to Yorktown and here's the referral and great, you guys are doing this, but, we can't help this person. So there's this sense of isolation that our team has. Like within the team, people are very connected, but outside of it, we're kind of on an island. No matter how much we try to connect or partner with hospitals or institutions that may have, the resources that some clients may need. So I think that's been a challenge for us. It connects to the first workshop previous to this, but it does feel a bit isolating actually, and scary sometimes. That, when a hospital calls you and says, you have a Cadillac program for this client, we're like, oh, really? $40 million budget.
Good to know.
Right, and so there's a lot of resentment that happens. There's this are you kidding me? So I think we've been trying to sort of educate workers in the healthcare professions outside of our little island, because it's going to be more than us, all of us that needs to, plug in and support, right? So.
Matt, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I'm going to go a little broader here. I think one of the biggest challenges, the biggest barriers is a little bit more systemic, and those are the organizational challenges that prevent us from having the resources and the logistical means that we need to do the work that we want to do. That doesn't mean it can't be done, it just makes it a lot more difficult. So as an example, at the time of leaving Texas to come here, our team in one location for the Veterans Administration has handled 958 cases this year. It's a lot. I think it's a lot. It feels like a lot. And it feels like a lot because for the past 12 years, I've been the only full-time person for this team. And as of 3 weeks ago, we have a second person who was immediately detailed to another position where there was a shortage in staffing. So it continues. But so what do? Do you give up? Do you throw your hands up, wave the flag and say, oh, I can't do this. I don't have a team. You don't. You find people. There are people out there who are committed to wanting to either do good, keep people safe, or just do something different, learn something new. When we've tried to cultivate teams or the different versions of the teams over more than a decade, I'm less likely to look for people who have evidence of direct experience doing work in risk assessment, threat assessment, or any of those terms that you want to use. I look for people with enthusiasm. I look for people who are creative. I look for people who are flexible in their thinking, who are dynamic as much as the work necessitates. This is dynamic work. So our team is never static either, because people are not static. People are dynamic. So you have to kind of consider adjusting the layout of your team as it's necessary. So one day we have our core team, the next day we have different people at the table who can speak to helping to best understand the behavior, the circumstances, so we can resolve it effectively. So I think in the absence of, let's say, the finances that you need to support your team from a budget standpoint, because my budget is $0 and it's been consistently that for 12 years. I can't even get a tablecloth to represent my program at a formal function. So with that, you could be disgruntled, which I usually am, and very grumpy, or you make it work. And again, it goes back to, I've tried to find people. When you go for people who you assume will be good at this, well, it's got to be the psychologist, it's got to be the psychiatrist, and my background's mental health, so I'm putting myself down here. It's not necessarily. Don't just go for the thing, go for who the person is and that they want to do this. So. And they're more likely to stick around. We don't really have attrition because people seem to find value. And as long as you remind those people of why what they're doing is valuable, and also inflate and stroke their ego a little bit to let them know why their individual role on that team matters, they're more likely to stay and do it with more energy and enthusiasm. We all do more when we feel that we are appreciated, basic human needs. So I need to make my teammates feel connected to the cause, which is exactly mirroring what we're trying to do with the people that we're trying to help. Make them feel a sense of connection to something. And I think that's a common theme. The team and how we function as this little ecosystem is just a microcosmic representation of how people function as a group altogether. So be creative, be flexible, and you can make it work.
So we have a couple questions, but I wanted to ask you, Cynthia, do you have any barriers in your multidisciplinary team?
Well, I was just going to add, I mean, I was thinking about this. We haven't had a lot of barriers within our lab, but the barriers are more systemic, I think, in the downstream, meaning part of our charge as a lab, probably about half of our team are students at the undergrad, master's, and doctoral level who we're training for the field, and we're trying to train them to be a different kind of leader with different types of backgrounds, bringing different personal, professional, disciplinary lenses to the field. But if the field's not ready for that, then you end up training them for jobs that don't yet exist, right?
Yes.
And so I think that's a concern, particularly for the doctoral students who then want to stay in academia and find that they go on the job market and the jobs are like, well, I don't understand you with your, who are your advisors and in what fields and, applying for this.
What department do you fit in?
Exactly, right? And so I think you can't, you have to be continually voicing these concerns to lodge and motivate changes across the field. And I also just wanted to pick up on something Sammy said about what's not other fields that we haven't represented, because one of the things I was so struck by, and I want to say pleasantly surprised, except I was so much more shocked than that I don't have the right words for it, at Biden's summit last week on Thursday, when the federal panel included not only the heads of DHS and DOJ, but the head of the National Endowment for the Arts and the head of AmeriCorps. So for the first time in my whole career, we had a conversation about service, civic engagement, the arts, healing. I mean, I think the soul was mentioned, and like security and law enforcement, right? That's amazing. That was an amazing moment to see. And, we need more of that. So I think the arts is a really big part of this, the way that the arts can play a role in healing and in recovery, and the way that civic engagement can play a role in off-ramping people who might be called to service or to defense or to the warrior idea or heroism or all kinds of other things that we know can make them susceptible to types of propaganda. So, that was a really moving moment. And I think it was just, for me, it was like a moment of, I cannot believe this is actually happening on a stage and we have these 4 people together who are all here talking about hate-fueled violence. So I think that we need more of that. And I'd like to see the arts and civic engagement organizations and participation organizations be at the table too.
Yes, absolutely. I love that. Sorry, Sammy. I will say, I so appreciate that you brought that, because it's also what we saw in the plenary session, looking at how we can involve the athletics community and sports fans and teams. And when we think about youth and involving coaches and so on. And so that multidisciplinary team can be so creatively put together to address those individualized needs of the person. So sorry, Sammy.
No, please don't apologize. I thought of something just hearing you all talk, and I feel like what we're essentially talking about is teamwork, right? And it sounds very simple, but again, to connect it to the last panel, and I think what was said was right, but I think that there's something to add on to that, right? So if we all just look at the person next to us and you say hi to them, pretend you're from organization A or organization B. Like literally look at each other real quick. Y'all are the only people at your 2 organizations who know and work with each other, right? You can work together really well because you've built this really sustained relationship. I can text you, email, call you. Maybe we even have lunch together. Our families might know each other. There's some real trust there, right? Yeah. What happens when you no longer work there and you no longer work there?
That's it.
Right.
Done.
Right. It's not like a sustainable partnership, right? And I think as important as it is that we make these person-to-person connections across organizations, I do think that there is something to be said about formalizing and making it an actual partnership between organizations, right? And it's not just the sustainability piece. I think from my perspective, one of the things that I notice is that, again, when you specifically behavioral health, mental health professionals partner with law enforcement, we don't share information well unless we have MOUs. And the important piece about that is not everyone is in a moment of crisis every time that we're supporting them, where they can share more information, right? So when those exceptions are not in place, if we're really going to do ongoing collaborative management for that individual, it's super important that we're constantly talking to each other and be able to free flow as much information as is appropriate for us to be able to do this long-term intervention and support. So I just thought about that as you all were talking about that.
Thank you. Right. So that release of information for the therapist isn't just for those mandated reporting situations, those duty to warn and duty to protect situations, that it's something that can be in place in advance, and there can be a more open share of information. So we have a question from the audience that I think some of you have spoken to that I'd like to hear from the group. What do you think the biggest barriers to scaling up practitioner capacity nationally are? How can they be overcome?
I think we talk a lot about in Toronto and Canada stigma. So the population is stigmatized. So, words like terrorism, extremism are really scary. They're politicized also, and the CVE kind of practice and how it's evolved over the years has been incredible. But I think it kind of comes from this sort of national security, this policing state originally. And I think when people think, the general population, even social workers, think of terrorism or extremism, they think of 9/11, right? That's sort of the hallmark in North America, at least in the memory of that. So I think it's about destigmatizing language and changing the language too, because sometimes the language does target communities, at least in Canada it has over the years. So I think, when we do our presentations to general social workers to try to hook them in, we move away from those words because they have meaning for people and complexities to them. So we might use stuff like targeted violence, right, or hate, which is a little more acceptable than extremism, terrorism. So stigma and language, I think, are critical to move away from that so it's more accessible for people.
Yeah, I think the easy answer is funding, right? And I think that's also a challenge because then it's why isn't the funding there? If you paid a social worker a living wage, they're probably going to do your job. Like, not that hard. That's kind of how my profession works. But I think part of the challenge then is when you look for funding for this kind of work, it's both identifying the scope of the problem and it's helping people see that by addressing this problem directly and owning, for instance, specifically where white supremacy sits in America and what that can mean for health and community happiness in a place maybe that doesn't want to talk about it as much is huge. And so in our work, especially when I've worked with families who are affected by the engagement of hate with a loved one, is getting them to a place where there is a moment of grief, of having to accept that somebody you love walked this path and that there is a future for your loved one that you have to grieve isn't going to happen, a future where they never engage with this behavior. And I think if we scale that up to imagine what that would look like for a community to do, to grieve a world that perhaps they wanted to believe was already free from hate, if you give people a path to accepting that and seeing that there still is a path for hope and healing, the money, I think, will follow. So I think the challenge for us is getting to a place of how can we tell the story of de-radicalization, of disengagement, in a way that both honors the reality of what's happening and gives people a path to maintain their sense of hope, which I believe can help us scale up this work.
And I think that there's kind of a perception in at least some segments of society that people who are calling themselves formers, they're jumping off the white supremacy bandwagon and jumping onto the de-radicalization grift, and that there's this perception that these people are getting grant funding and trying to make themselves rich and they're really doing it for the money, and that is true in some cases, although even in those cases none of them are getting rich. But I will tell you that those of us that are doing this from the heart are absolutely not getting rich off of this. I've been doing it like as a volunteer, working a regular job for since 2011 when Life After Hate was founded, and I fairly recently left that career and am doing this as like my only work now, and I'm not getting rich off of this. So to speak to what Rob said, if this stuff was funded with the sense of urgency that it should be to solve these problems and approach these people and diffuse these narratives that we're seeing that are immense right now. I was saying at the media explosion shortly after Donald Trump was elected president that over and over again he's using the same language I used to recruit people into white supremacy, and I was saying that then, and getting a lot of flack about it, about you don't know what you're talking about, blah 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 blah. A lot of us were saying the same thing in this realm, and look at where we're at now. Look at January 6th and the stuff we saw this morning about all this hybridizing and how much it's blown up. it's a direct result of all of that attention that has happened since then. It's grown because of that, and I mean, like the funding is woefully inadequate right now. I hate to say it, and that's probably the greatest barrier to scalability is that you can't scale anything if you can't pay for it, right?
Right.
I mean.
I would just add really quickly to that, which is I think the funding model is broken both on the practitioner end and also on the supply of trained practitioners end, which is really the funding model of higher ed. And I was just in a conversation with someone about how Germany has created a dedicated master's program now, which trains mobile advisor counselors, and with the for de-radicalization and prevention of extremism work. It's a dream, right? A dedicated master's program you're creating, and so they go, well, great, let's do it here. I'm like, well, it's free there, right? Like it helps. So there's like you already have this massive hurdle, cleared, which is who's going to pay tuition for for the expense that a dedicated master's degree program costs in the U.S. And some people will pay tuition, but can you convince a university to launch a program? You have to demonstrate that there's enough demand of people who will pay that kind of tuition, or you have to get a philanthropist who will, like, in perpetuity fund it. And that's, those are challenges that other countries don't have because the higher ed system itself is subsidized. And I think you can look at that at every level of systems that this is connected to, in healthcare, and who has insurance and who has access to degree granting programs that they can afford. So that we have dilemmas here that are outside of our own control that challenge the scalability of some of these models as well.
I think the only other thing that I think is really interesting about that, we're like coming at funding from all different angles. And one thing that I think that bothers me the most about this space is that there's not enough funders that not only reward you, but really try to push you into collaborating between organizations, right? So what would it look like if funding said, if you don't work with another organization from a discipline, or you don't work with 2 other organizations to do this project, you're not going to get the funding, right? That I think that could break down some of the walls that exist in this space, right? Because a lot of the times where it happens, like we're replicating work instead of like working on different things or trying to figure out why this model didn't work this time. And I think it kind of hurts the field, and ultimately it hurts everybody else that that could be a victim of this type of stuff too. And I just think this last piece is that the context of looking outside of the United States, I think, is also very interesting as well. One thing that I think that I'm just kind of enamored with is that when you look at a lot of countries and you look at local leaders like mayors, and I won't talk too much about that. There's another organization here that's their shtick. But I think having a mayor be the convener, or someone from the mayor's office be the convener, instead of an organization that maybe other organizations or disciplines don't trust. And then also when the mayor is the convener and some of the onus is on the mayor and the mayor's office, then there's a potential for that funding to be tied to that work, right? Because like you have to want this to be successful if you want to get reelected. So maybe I'm just a shyster.
I realize we only have a couple minutes left, 3 minutes left, and I do want to leave space for the next panel, but I want to thank all of you. I think that what everyone here is speaking to is the necessity of a multidisciplinary team, that there are barriers, but they are not insurmountable, and that it needs to be creatively assembled depending on particular programs and particular individuals' needs. And so it is both a program level multidisciplinary team, the way the program defines it, but also the individualized programming. And that scaling up is just recognizing, again, building those partnerships, funding these organizations that are able to work together, that create those multidisciplinary teams, but also sustaining that work with someone, because it isn't a one-shot deal. What everybody here has spoken about is not a single interaction with someone that makes the difference between being a part of a hate movement and exiting a hate movement. We do plant seeds like that. Those things are meaningful. But really the work to exit violent extremism is a long-term process that requires different people at different stages of the process. And that multidisciplinary team and the providers here on the stage and the people representing multidisciplinary teams would say that it's certainly possible, and we all just need to be creative in working through that process. So thank you. I'm just because there are great questions, but we have 1 minute left. So I am going to close our panel. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.